onto the Lifetime Achievement Award, which recognises true industry giants whose work has endured and inspired over the course of a career. And this year's winner will come as no surprise to anyone interested in car design. In a career spanning nearly 50 years, this designer has worked his magic at Chrysler, Ford twice, Volvo 3 times, Geely Group, and while also freelancing for Bentley, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, MG, Triumph, Rolls-Royce, and many more. It is, of course, design legend Peter Horbury. Now, Peter's diverse portfolio covers cars, vans, buses, London taxis, and from the mid-1970s until the present day, he's been employed across the world, from Coventry to Detroit, and from Shanghai to Gothenburg. It's all a long way from the small Northumbrian town of Alnwick, where Peter was born. He studied at the Newcastle College of Art in the late 60s before completing a master's degree in automotive design at the RCA in 1972. But his first big project was with Chrysler, working on the Horizon, which went on to win European Car of the Year in 1979. It kicked off a career that took Peter across the globe, and until this year he'd been working as Executive VP of Design at Geely, overseeing a variety of brands, including Lynk & Co, Geometry and Zeekr. Recently, he traded 7 brands for one as he moved over as Senior VP of Design at Lotus. So we asked Peter to reflect on his 50 years in design, talk about some of his favourite projects, and speak a little bit about what the future might hold. Enjoy. Well, hi, Peter. Lovely to have you with us, and huge congratulations on the Lifetime Achievement Award. I suppose the obvious question, though, with a man who's still deeply immersed in the world of car design is, were you surprised to get a Lifetime Achievement Award at this juncture?
Well, yes, in a way, I suppose it always sounds a little terminal. Like in Hollywood, there's the Lifetime Achievement or Before It's Too Late award. So it has that thought behind it. But obviously, I'm very, very honoured. And even if I haven't quite closed the door on my career, it's obviously coming towards a conclusion, and it has been quite a lifetime in many respects.
When it was looking at the interview, reading the interview you did with for Car Design Review 8, it was astonishing. You know, you've been absolutely all over the world with so many different brands. I wondered what's been, I suppose, the secret to your longevity, would you say?
Well, I think one of the prime reasons is that I make sure I put together a team that I can trust to know what they're doing and get on with it, rather than dictating every move and getting involved in every line, every surface. It's really a case of building a team that knows what they're doing, set the goals, set the vision, let's say, and then it's like a film director, I suppose. I've said this before, that you know, the film director doesn't write a script or hold a camera, sound equipment, or act, or even edit the whole thing. But at the end of the day, it's his creation. And by making sure that each of those players has their freedom to create and just keep it in line, then he achieves his vision, or often even better. And all those other people, the writers, etc., still consider it was their input that created the success. So I think that's the secret to being a design leader, is to let designers design. And you know, if rather than just say, I want you to move that line 5 millimeters that way and I'll be back tomorrow to check it, then you'd lose their interest. It ceases to be their creation. And I've also often said, if a designer realizes he's been told what to do, then you've failed. You have to make sure that the last word is the designer's. And I think by keeping that sort of slightly one step back, it's been well, one of the reasons, I suppose, it's been quite a long time.
And in assembling those kind of teams, like you say, it's almost like conducting an orchestra or designing, shooting a film. Do you know inherently what you're looking for when you're sort of trying to build something, build a team like that?
Well, obviously, a mixture. I think you need experience, because you know there's it's a very complex product, a car. It's hundreds, if not thousands, of pieces that come together in a confined product, confined space, let's say, both exterior and interior, especially interior. So you need some experience, but you need fresh ideas, and that's where a mixture of young guys and girls who don't know what's impossible, therefore they can shoot for the moon. But then you have another level of people who've done a number of years who can help them get that bright idea into the next phase. And then you need somebody quite experienced and perhaps a little bit more authoritative, because in any company, as many senior managers that there are as many chief designers, and that's when the real experience and a little bit more of authority, let's say, would be useful to, politely say, guide the management of the company, but really explain and tell them where we should be going, because it's not the same as the engineer telling the board that, because X the weight of the vehicle times Y the suspension, times Y the cornering forces equals Z the suspension. It is like this. I've proved it mathematically and scientifically. I can't do that. So you have to have a convincing argument and story to tell, so that you can persuade the management of a company maybe to take some risks and to move ahead. Whereas, traditionally they would keep it, a little bit back. So, I'd just like to finish off this thing I've said before, is that, it's no use giving the customer what he wants or she wants. You have to give the customer what, and that's the difference between the designer's role and others in an organization.
What do you think? I mean, as we talk about, building teams and kind of, a mixture of skills and diverse talent, what was it that, your mentors and your seniors saw in you, do you think, as a young designer? Hard to say, I imagine. But
I can't imagine beyond a sense of humor, which I think is critical as well, to get on in the world of creativity. It's I suppose listening, but not just taking in. You suggest and maybe propose something new. As I said, it's the younger people who don't know why you can't do something that often give an idea that can be molded into something which is possible. And that's what I hope I've done in my early days, bring something new. And then somebody in a senior role has helped me take that on to the next step. I never forget the first time I had one of my sketches was chosen at Chrysler, and I was confronted by a team of 5 or 6 guys with their clay tools in their hands. Say, now what do we do? And you realize that a 2-dimensional sketch is a very, very small part of the whole process. And then for these guys to sculpt it into a 3-dimensional entity, it's fantastic. And of course, in those days, with a good team of modelers, they knew how to do it. And so you learned from them. You could give certain amount of instruction, but many times it was the modeler who knew what 2 surfaces meeting at a certain line or point would actually do. So they would correct it, they would massage it, and do a professional job. So it is a team effort, definitely. And the younger designers do respect and benefit from an older, more experienced team of modelers, be they clay modelers or digital modelers.
And do you remember the first time you realized that, well, perhaps the first time you entered a studio, I suppose there must have been some alchemy there, or something where spoke to you that thought, well, this is actually what I want to do for the rest of my life?
Well, I think I decided that some years before that. Like many designers would tell you, it was about the age of 7 or 8 that it really became an ambition and a passion. And so I followed the the advice I was given by various major companies who I'd written to, and just like my friend Ian Callum, he wrote to Jaguar, I wrote to a number of companies, and they set me on the right path towards getting into a studio in the first place. So I did the art school industrial design course. I then went to the Royal College to do automotive design. So it was 7 years so 6 years of education before I walked into the studio for the first time. But I never forget that day. It was already then an ambition realized, and I think that was very special. I remember it to this day. It was as important, almost as important, I should say, as when your first child is born. It's a life-changing experience, and that was a real memorable day. And it was in Whitley, when Chrysler UK had Whitley as a studio, well before Jaguar's days. And yeah, they were working on all sorts of things, Avengers, and yeah.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Do you see yourself as an international designer? I mean, you've been all over the place, but you've got your roots in the Northeast, and that was obviously very formative, and you've held on to your sense of humour, which I suspect stems from there. But do you see yourself as an international designer?
Well, I suppose as I've worked outside of the UK longer than I've worked in the UK, bang goes the gong from the palace. I'm admitting that. But yes, I was in the UK for the first, let's say, I think it was 5 years of my career at Chrysler, then at Ford in Dunton. But then I went off to Volvo on a contract, which could have lasted only 6 months, but actually lasted for 2 years. And then I continued with Volvo, but in Holland. But we took the project down to Holland, where I was supposed to stay for another 3 months to hand it over, but there was really nobody to hand the project over to. That was the interior of the 480. I don't know if you remember that.
Fantastic interior. Love it.
That was my job. And we did the first creating in Sweden, then took it to Holland. And I spent 5 years in the Dutch studio of Volvo before I left to come back to the UK with MGA in 1986. So I'd already spent quite a stretch abroad in that first 12 years.
Picking up on Volvo, reading the interview in Car Design Review, you if I'm paraphrasing slightly, but you shaping a brand like that, it's like you described it as like being given the custody of the crown jewel. So how did you sort of deal with that pressure? Because everyone is going to have an opinion on what you're doing, particularly with what you were trying to do, which was to try and sort of modernize a very respected but slightly unexciting brand, if we're honest.
Well, I think so. It was under the spotlight, let's say, and I even got hate mail when first new Volvos started to appear. And one of them, I remember, said, if that Englishman thinks that this is a Volvo, then he must be suffering from mad cow disease. That was the only thing he could think of that was derogatory to the UK at the time. But
right.
Anyway, it was a very interesting period, and we did have quite a lot of detractors who felt we were spoiling it. But I always said that, Volvo had everything going for it, except I think the visual appeal. It was designed from the inside out, let's say, and they'd almost convinced themselves that for a car to be safe, it couldn't be beautiful. And I remember saying to the senior management when they suggested I was taking it a bit too far, I said, look, the problem with you guys is you believe the best medicines are the ones that taste the worst. And that was an attitude I think was Calvinistic, Swedish at the time. But if a car was going to be practical and safe, it couldn't be beautiful as well, which was what we tried to wean them off and say, we're not going to lose any of that, any of the safety, any of the functionality, which are both very Swedish. And also, that was the guidelines I took for the exterior design and the interior design. We are Swedish. Let's show we are Swedish. And Swedish furniture, Swedish design was highly respected. all around the world.
Absolutely.
So why not, jump on that bandwagon, let's say, and use the Swedish design ethic to develop the Volvo. So it was truly Swedish. The Swedes would never create a product which was inherently unsafe for people, no matter what it is.
Mm.
It's probably the toaster that you couldn't put your fingers into, or it's that sort of attitude which people come first, and that was very much part of Volvo. And to take the family on a long journey, as Sweden is a very big country, a long country, to pack the family and all their belongings into a vehicle for the vacation or the weekend, what was better than a box, I suppose? And that's why with the V70 of 2000 or 2001, we purposely made it quite sporty and rounded at the front. And then if you look at the side glass, it pivots outwards as it gets to the third window where the luggage space is. It's actually vertical, whereas it starts off quite a lot of tumble home. It becomes more functional, let's say. And the rear door was vertical still. We kept that so that it was a marriage of good looks, but also functionality, and of course, certainly safe. So it was a matter of bringing all the things together and creating a Scandinavian or Swedish product that was attractive, let's say, as well.
I think that's the metaphor you used there about the medicine, and it can't be good for you unless it hurts in some way or it's slightly distasteful. But it's a very good way of putting it. It speaks a little bit to the idea of designers as storytellers. Do you think designers need to be good storytellers to realize their vision?
It has been very important. I thought all my career, but especially with the Chinese. It needs a story, and when we started out doing the new Geelys, we put a shape on the top of the instrument panel over the air vents, and it had a certain long, slow curve to it, and it was taken from a famous bridge in Hangzhou, the headquarters of Geely, a place called Westlake. It's a beautiful lake, and there's a bridge called a Broken Bridge, which is stuff of legend. There's stories, there's myth and legend centered on this particular bridge, so it's known throughout the land. So when we sort of copied that on the Geely, we were able to say that, talk about it to the press, and show pictures of the bridge and how it was translated. And that went down so well that we realized we had to have a story for just about everything we did. And even down to the speaker mesh on the speaker grills, it has a very ancient Chinese architectural logo, let's say, in the speaker mesh. And that again was another story which was so easy to tell, and the press and the public lap it up in China. There's 10,000 years of history, and we try to use it. So it's important, very much so. And even in Ford in America, we tried very hard to show that there was a pride in American products, let's say, that had been a bit lost, I think.
It's interesting, this kind of idea of kind of understanding a local context, and particularly I think in a world of sort of globalized design, I suppose, there becomes with it a certain hegemony. How is this a lesson that you would like young designers to really take on board, because they are operating in a very different circumstances to how your design career was formed and how you kind of understood what design was meant to be?
I think back to my Chrysler days when the management tended to be a lot of American guys sent over from Detroit, and we weren't alone. I mean, Vauxhall was the same, Ford was the same, a huge American influence that I felt was, okay for America, but not necessarily did it translate to Europe. When we started the Horizon project, that was a Simca, Chrysler owned both the Roots Group and Simca into it and actually sent the car to America because they needed something more compact. So we were given a more European. And having said that, when it got to America, they had a Volkswagen Rabbit, or Golf as it was known in America, Rabbit in America. And they put a lot of detailing, including one thing which was ruinous. I felt that the Golf had very wide wheel arches and the wheels, filled them. Well, they wanted those wheel arches on the horizon, but the wheels would never go. There was Simca platform, and the wheels were well inboard already. And then we put the extra, or the American team put the extra width on, and it always looked a bit underwheeled when it came out. But that was, I think in America, they were able to look at the body and not necessarily the body to wheel situation. But yeah, the influence came from Europe on that. And I think if I've done one thing in my entire career, I've respected the origin of the car, the country of origin, the culture of origin. I think, that the best cars do reflect in some way where they come from. I mean, an Alfa Romeo couldn't come from Japan. It was only Italy. That's where it was born. And I think if you look at Citroën, for example, they had a complete French look back in the 50s and 60s with the DS and the Deux Chevaux, one representing Parisian chic, and the other one representing the French countryside, let's say. And both influenced those cars very much. And they were selling France to the world. And, you can look at that in any successful brand where they've kept their identity from where they come from. And that, I think, has been a useful guideline for me, that if you capture the essence of the culture, then you bring something exotic to the global market. So, look at Japan. They started doing these extremely soft, rounded cars. The jelly mold, it was called, I think.
Yeah.
By the way, that was started with the Sierra. It wasn't Japanese, but the Sierra wasn't the original. I was there when we were designing the Sierra in Cologne, and the Porsche 928 was the real influence.
Right.
And that was the start of it all, really. Then the Japanese followed with very soft Nissans and things, but then all of a sudden in the early 90s, they started being brave and bringing Japanese design, which was like the bento box versus the plate. It was square versus round. And I think some of the most interesting Japanese cars were the ones that went back to the Japanese roots. So it's been useful for everybody. We've tried to do that with Geely as well, even if it's just the details, bringing China into the car.
I suspect I know the answer to this, but it is that you've designed several, very, very, very successful cars. But I wondered if there's one that you really wish you had your name on it, so to sort of say, a car that you wish you'd designed.
Well, I think that Porsche 928 was a masterpiece, both exterior and interior, and it lasted for God knows how many years, 20 years, without major changes. And the interior with its binnacle attached to the column, swept up lines of the door handles or up into the IP. I mean, let's face it, I copied that for the 480. It was somewhat less of a car, but and the binnacle, the separate binnacle, was all down to my admiration for the 928. So it's a long time ago, that car, but I think if you see one today, you can only admire the way that it wasn't a jelly mold shape. It had tension running through it, like all Porsches do. They are soft or rounded shapes, but there's muscle just under the skin, and that's what I think was one of the most successful designs, which influenced a huge number of brands after it, without having that recognition, to be honest.
Yeah, it was the one that was kind of it was always slightly in the shadow of the 911, which is obviously a very different car and very different prospect. But that became the iconic, if I want to use an overused term, but the iconic Porsche nameplate as opposed to the 928. But yes, I feel that kind of rounded back end. It was absolutely fantastic. It really used to be one parked near where my parents lived, and I was walked past it on the way to school. It was absolutely fantastic.
I remember the size of it when I was in Cologne. I was going to the Ford studio there, and I was in the town, and I walked around a corner, and there was my first 928 in real life. I'd seen pictures, but nothing had prepared me for the vast the amount of room it occupied. It was huge.
Yeah.
But look at it today. In today's cars, it's tiny in comparison. So, you know, we've got used to this expansion of vehicle size over the decades. Well, that was considered huge in those days.
No, absolutely, and you know, cars are just absolutely, you know, as we know, sort of far bigger than they used to be. If you look at the concept car video that from earlier, Renault 5 concept car, it takes huge from the turbo, but it's probably about twice the size of
yeah, I only wish the Swedish engineer or the architects who design the car parks in Sweden would admit that cars have grown, because we're still in mini-sized parking spaces.
Yes, it can be very difficult to extricate yourself from the vehicle once you've parked up. Finally, Peter, I wanted to ask you if you could look back. I know it's probably quite a hard thing to put your finger on, but is there a particular project that you felt would be your legacy project, the one that you're most proud of, I suppose?
Well, I've been asked this before, and maybe it's different each time I answer it, because I remember different things. I mean, the car behind me was a great deal of fun when we worked. Ian Callum and I and a few others worked together out of sight from Sweden. We did this in the UK, so we more or less did what we wanted. It was a fantastic project. But I think in Volvo terms, especially the first XC90 was a project that we really did our homework. We knew we needed to do an SUV, but it had to be a Volvo. And I think one of the things that we did best was we listened to people, and especially women in America. We used to organize dinners with a group of women that had very different backgrounds. One of them happened to be an ex-Bond girl.
Wow.
Yeah. Maud Adams, who now has her own successful business in America and California. And she was one of the invitees at the dinner. And they talked about their homes, their families, their business, their work, and occasionally their cars. And eventually the conversation got round to SUVs. And I remember that, you know, they all thought that the current crop of SUVs, the big GMCs and Chevrolets, things like that, they were too aggressive. They had this massive bluff fronts, horizontal hood, vertical windscreen, and just looked aggressive. And the word macho came up. But then they started to talk about masculine rather than macho. And masculine had a positive context. Macho was negative. And we established that what they looked for in a vehicle was a car or a vehicle that would take care of them, but not in a come out but fighting manner, more of a, you know, confident, sort of protective mode. So when we did the XC90, we followed those sort of thoughts, and rather than a horizontal hood, we tilted it downwards, but kept a vertical front, but with a soft upper radius, let's say. And then we put the shoulders on, which gave it that stance that looked like it was safe and protective. And they did say that the Mercedes at the time, the ML, had too lower hood, and the front end was canted back too much. So that was almost a minivan, which then became negative again. So the Volvo sat in between the big GMC and that Mercedes. And it was a huge success in the American market, especially with women and families. So just by asking the customer, but not asking, you know, about what car do you want, how should the front be? It was a case of getting into more the psyche of the customer and, you know, offering them something which we felt fitted the bill. And I see them still in Gothenburg. There's still a few around, and I think back to those days when it was a car that fit the bill perfectly. So.
And Peter, you haven't finished designing, have you? You're about to take over. I say you're going to move across to Lotus, which is quite a again, another very, very prestigious and well-loved brand. But could you tell us a little bit more about what you're going to be up to there, Hethel?
Well, yeah, Lotus. It's I suppose the cream, let's say, towards the end. I've ditched the responsibility for 7 different brands and picked one of them, and we're about to take Lotus into a whole new era of new vehicles, new segments of the market. And I think my experience with 10 years at Geely, with China, and the fact I am British and know the Lotus brand from my childhood, it's a good position for me to be in, where we will bring the Lotus sports cars under Russell Carr in Hethel and a new studio in Coventry, where we're doing what we call the lifestyle vehicles. We've already announced that there's after 131, there's a 132, 133, 134, and 135 to come, and that there will be no more petrol-driven Lotuses. So this is a whole new world, and I'm really excited and honored to be part of this. So, I bring the 2 design departments together, and I will be responsible for the next so many years of new products.
Well, we're really looking forward to seeing what Lotus does next under your steerage, Peter. It's obviously a hugely well-loved brand, and it could, hopefully, take on the move into a new sphere, a lifestyle away from the sports cars and lifestyle. But the possibility to potential seem very
well. I think just finally guarantee one thing: Russell has been responsible for some beautiful cars, especially recently, the Avaya and the Emira, and I've promised that we will keep beauty as the main guideline for the future of Lotus, whatever the type of vehicle is. That's my ambition. Beautiful cars.
I mean, that's for a designer, I think that's probably the pinnacle, isn't it?
There's nothing wrong with beautiful.
Well, I think that's probably all we've got time for today, Peter. Huge thanks to you for joining me to speak to Car Design News about and huge congratulations as well on the lifetime achievement.
Thank you. It's a great honor coming from you guys. It's the car design world, and I really appreciate that, because that's the pinnacle, let's say, of the 50 years next year that I went to the Royal College of Art, sponsored by Chrysler. So it's been a stretch.
It has. Maybe we should have some party. Hopefully, if we can. Okay, well that's about it. And I think if you want to read the full interview with Peter, it's in go to Car Design News and order yourself a copy of Car Design Review 8. You will not be disappointed. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.